Welcome to Marvel Vision, a podcast about Marvel, the MCU, and right now, Marvel's The Avengers, or depending on where you're listening and watching this, Avengers Assemble, or The Avengers, or many other titles.
Speak to that international audience.
Exactly. I'm Alex.
I'm Justin.
And we have two special guests for you guys today. We've got Jon Gabrus, the host of the High and Mighty podcast and Action Boys, and many other podcasts, and Eric Goldman, the managing editor for Fandom and host of the We Enjoy podcast. I love this. We've kind of gathered our own Avengers here, I would like to say.
Definitely.
I'm
accurate.
I'm Michael Pena of this. I'm 2 tiers removed from being having a skill set at all.
Let's not get into the skills we're contributing here. I don't think we have to.
Yeah, real quick, what does everybody bring to the table? Let's start there.
I'm Hulk in that you don't want me to completely go off or else this podcast will suck. And so I'll just try to be Banner for as much as possible.
Love it. So actually, let's start off. Let's take a big step back. I'm sure pretty much everybody listening knows exactly everything about the Avengers, but it came out May 4th, 2012. It was directed by Joss Whedon, story by Zach Penn and Joss Whedon, which was much discussion because Zach Penn did the original draft. Joss Whedon reportedly rewrote the entire thing. They argued about it and eventually settled, so it's all okay. But before we get into that or any of the movie in general, let's go back to where you started. Like when you first saw Avengers, what your reaction was like, what your screening was like. Justin, why don't you start off? What was your first Avengers experience? And I imagine, given that like we talked about Captain America, and you're like, oh, I watched it last week. When did you first watch Avengers?
I watched this in the theaters. I think we saw it together, you and I and Pete, the third host here. It's amazing. Rewatching it, I rewatched it today, right before we taped, and I'm standing in my kitchen crying. And I feel like I had the same reaction when just everyone's together in the big last sequence. That the epicness of that was right there on the first viewing, and it's still just as palpable rewatching it now.
Eric, what about you? Where did you first see Avengers, and what was that like?
So I saw it at the world premiere in Hollywood at the El Capitan Theater.
Nice.
I was very, very lucky, guys, because Jim Vejvoda still runs the movie section of IGN. I ran the TV section at the time. But Jim, for him, his biggest fandom is James Bond, and he got the offer to go to a Skyfall set visit the week that was happening, the junket for Avengers. So that's the only reason I got to do it. And in this case, and we could talk about some of the things about like the shawarma scene being shot after the fact, the junket screening was the premiere. That doesn't always happen. I was not on the list to go to premieres at that point. But because they were basically making the junket screening come to the premiere, that's why I got to go and watch it that way. It was a pretty amazing experience. For me, I was a lifelong Marvel fan, reading the Avengers comics since I was like 7 or 8, and to see this movie happen and to see it happen so successfully and so well done. I was pretty much just joyous about the entire experience. I didn't get to go to the after party, by the way, but I watched them go in, and but no, it was just
as fun. Just as fun.
Yeah. It was amazing.
You were seated right between RDJ and Gwyneth Paltrow for the screen.
Exactly. No, I was in the nosebleeds of the balcony of the El Capitan, but I didn't care. I was just happy to be there.
Gabrus, what about you? Where did you first see Avengers?
I saw it late because I didn't go to the premiere, but I was at the after party. And I went straight there. So bummer, we could have met then if you could have got in, but I was in there
passing ships.
I was passing hors d'oeuvres and we were passing ships. No, I saw this most likely opening weekend. At some point, I just tried to look in my iCal while you guys were talking, and I'm embarrassed by what was in my iCal for like that weekend. It's like audition for Target, like just the most lame, low-level acting bullshit. But my big takeaway from this movie was, and I'm like, unpacking, getting into the headspace I was in 2012 is so different than how I feel about Marvel movies right now. It's crazy because I distinctly remember being like, holy shit, they got all these people into one movie. This is so rad. And I hope they don't go JoJo the Idiot Circus Boy with this and tear it a fucking apart. That Lefty said for what everyone's subjective opinions are, but watching this again was really, I've seen it, of course, a handful of times. Watching it again last night, I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, yeah, this was fucking solid when it came out.
Mhm.
It's got its chunks like every other Marvel movie, but it really is a solid film all around.
So,
I feel like on a rewatch, Robert Downey Jr. really stands out as like the backbone of the whole Avengers franchise. And in this movie, like, there's a lot of setup stuff, and only when he pops, it's like, yes, that now I see.
I don't think Captain America is firing on all cylinders in this one yet either.
Yes.
He got, Chris Evans and Chris and RDJ sort of hold it all down in every other movie after this, including Civil War and stuff. But it feels weird here. Like, they don't have, maybe Chris Evans, I think he looks a little different now in a way that I like more, whereas the old colored Steve Rogers color, like sandy brown hair, looked weird. And so I too thought, holy shit, RDJ is like sweeping away with this movie that's full of mega talents, but he really shines because Chris Evans isn't hitting his stride yet, I think.
Well, and what's wild is Iron Man doesn't show up until 23 minutes into the movie, which is crazy. Apparently, Robert Downey Jr. pushed Joss Whedon and said, you got to put me in the first scene. I'm the star of the movie. Put there. And they were like, no, we'll hold back. We'll kind of build it. And I do think, to the credit
first
of the
scene, we got to have Loki, Coulson, everyone's favorite
Dr.
Avengers.
Selvig! Yeah!
No, you got to take a step back. Alexis Denisof in makeup, so he's unrecognizable, narrating, going, "That Tesseract." That's where we want to start. I did want to mention the first place I saw it because it was definitely, I think, the weirdest possible place I could have watched the Avengers. I was working at MTV at the time, and I needed to cover it, but the only place, to their credit, they were very nice about it. Marvel was able to get me into a screening in New York, but the screening they got me into was the Acura company screening. The car company who sponsored it, who like shows up all over there. And so I went to... Well, that's the thing that was nuts about it is I'm there and I'm like, holy shit, I'm getting to see the Avengers on screen. This is so exciting. I can't wait. I've waited for this my whole life. Pretty much silenced the entire movie until an Acura showed it up on screen and people lost it. Like, they just clapping and cheering for the car. It was so funny. And I did go to the after party for that, and they had an Acura right in the middle, and it was very exciting.
VIP.
The Acura thing is so funny, especially in the later Avengers movie when Tony Stark, a guy who flies in a suit and has the most high tech shit in the world, pulls up in an Acura. You're like, come on. Or it might be a Lexus in the later movies, but you're just like, what the fuck? Or an Audi. It's some like semi-prestige car, but you're like, bro, you have a million different suits that have all these different specifics. And you're like, I do like to drive a car every once in a while from New York to Westchester.
This car has air conditioning. You won't believe it. It's amazing.
Now, jumping into the movie, though, I did want to address something that we kind of talked about here, because I feel like I have a minority opinion about the movie, which is I like it and I appreciate it, and I really enjoy how it builds across the board, that it kind of goes like one character, two characters, three characters. But I don't think the movie really works for me until probably the last 45 minutes, which the last 45 minutes are incredible, and those last 45 minutes
it's a full cartoon is when you get on board, Sal.
Exactly.
Like, all right, now we know all the characters.
Time to
let
take
them
out
all
the cereal.
You're
jump
Chitauri,
around on the
dude.
green screen.
All you care about are the Chitauri? Get out of here with this tape.
That's when we get the Chitauri. That's when we get the waitress. That's the important
The real
part.
heroes of the series.
I don't want to go full PLP substitute on this episode, but I gotta go against you on this album, because on this rewatch, what hit me even harder was all of the drama, like watching Captain America fight Thor and Iron Man fight Thor, and all these human on human combat scenes, which are not in the movies as time goes on in the movies. They're in there way less. So I was really relishing in that and like the sort of half action movie mission stuff of like, I got to get the blade going. All right, well, I got to do parkour and fight this guy. And it's like, the Black Widow scene, like all those scenes meant more to me than the Chitauri. Although I will say, when I first saw it, everyone fighting together, including that quote unquote oneer where like Thor hammers that thing into the fucking carrier Chitauri. That fucking was rad. But on this rewatch, I relished in like, I wish they would have these more smaller moments of like Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man fighting for like control, power, ideology and stuff.
Yeah, I think I think the final fight, that final 5 minutes, is amazing and it's awesome and it delivered everything I wanted from an Avengers movie. But I do think the movie kind of builds and builds in a great way. The only thing I don't think works is that opening at Project Pegasus. I think it's just kind of clunky. It feels like they were having trouble with how to open the movie because they also filmed that Maria Hill framing device that didn't get used. And I never think.
Let me just interject for that for anybody who's listening who doesn't know about it. There's a bunch of deleted scenes you can check out, and like you're saying, a lot of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor was Maria Hill, Sam Jackson clashing with the World Security Council, and a lot of her storyline got pulled out, including the beginning scene and an end scene. The beginning scene set it up as like, oh, this is a disaster. We lost New York. Everybody died. Yeah. Thor's hammer is dripping in blood. It's so dark. And then at the end, it's a very classic, like, those terrible, 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 wonderful Avengers. I love them. And that's how they ended the movie. And of course, they cut that out. Probably for the better. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Rick.
Yes, and I don't think that opening really works. It's kind of clunky. The energy's off. It's not, the problem is not that they begin with the smaller characters, because I understand the inkling to do that. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's moving right. But I do think after that, it's all pretty great. I also have to, talk about the fact that Black Widow, this was the movie that made her a cool character, because Iron Man 2 sure didn't. And so just from that intro, from that one, when she's a prisoner, but it's, but who's really the prisoner? It's a great scene. And all the intros are great. And it does kind of just keep rolling. And then Iron Man's intro, it's like, okay, the energy gets even better. And then, as they start to come together and we get the Iron Man Thor fight. I do love all that stuff, though I do think that final fight is fantastic as far as just delivering like spectacle and, having them all now work together, because of course it's a story about them fighting until they can work together, but it does that really well. So I love it all in its totality, except for that opening sequence, which I think, just doesn't really.
Even great meals sometimes start with a dry salad.
Right.
And this is just a dressingless salad of an opening. But like you're saying, Eric, everything builds till we get, because I agree with you, Gabrus, like the way the moments, the Black Widow stuff, her opening sequence with the general there, and then later when she just works Loki.
Yes.
Is so fucking good. It made me so excited for the Black Widow movie.
I gotta say.
Finally get a decade later.
Yeah. Just when we need it.
I feel like the Avengers, this movie was so successful, and I mean, was built to be successful. Obviously, it was a runaway train, but I feel like they were like, yes, more space portals, glowing cubes, and thousands of green screened alien character fodder. It's all Power Rangers versus putties. I feel like there was a lot more going on in this movie, and I think they locked into like a weird. I think what Marvel like sort of expounded on and exacerbated was the final act of this movie, which I like in this movie, but I think they were like, now that Guardians of the Galaxy, that's this, like it all becomes that third act of the Avengers is what everything. The Civil War hero fight is like my favorite big fight in all of Marvel history, like with Ant-Man growing and all that shit. And that's, I think, because it's not just against faceless, stakesless aliens, which I think is the one time, like the thing that I get tired of in Marvel, and I'm maybe bringing in baggage from movies after this into this rewatch, I will say. Like I'm bringing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and all these other of like 7 hours of Avengers movies of one quote unquote Avengers movie I watched. I'm like bringing all that energy into this rewatch. So I'm making maybe more global complaints than I am macro.
But I do think this movie is, I mean, we've said this on every rewatch of the movies leading up to this one. This is the movie where the Marvel formula really comes together. But
we have legitimately said that every podcast so far.
But this is the movie where they're doing the most, and it sort of doesn't have the genre crutch they lean on a little bit with like Cap and some of the other movies, where it really is just like, this is our formula. We're going to do so much. The complexity of the fight, like the helicarrier battle,
yes,
it's wild. There's so many. Iron Man and Captain America are together, but then Iron Man's just in the rotor. Cap's like doing all these tricks, batting grenades out of the air, like some sort of...
Hawkeye's a bad guy. ScarJo's having a tete-a-tete. Like Hulk and Thor are going head to head, and also it's that fight is so rad, just, but I always laugh when they cut to Sam Jackson and Colby Smulders like firing pistols. It's always like, God, get the fuck out of here. We just saw a god fighting a fucking gamma freak in a fucking throwing planes at each other, and then cut to two people like taking cover and firing rounds. It's like, I'm glad you guys got your moment, but that doesn't feel like it belongs at this point. And when Cap has a gun is insane. That feels awesome. So American. Yeah.
When he like flips the dude and he just falls into the waist, you're like, oh, don't fuck with Captain America. But I agree with you. Like Nick Fury in this movie, I feel like Samuel Jackson was like, yo, where the fuck is my shit? And later, like the nuke's taking off in the plane, he's like, I'm gonna shoot a bazooka at it. And then he does, blows it up, and they're like, wrong plane, idiot. And it just flies off and he pulls out his gun. Yeah, there he is.
You just killed a fucking member of S.H.I.E.L.D. who was just taking off.
Killed a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. Fired a bazooka at a nuke is what he thought he was doing, which is insane.
On the deck of his helicarrier, yeah.
But Samuel Jackson was like, that's what I want to do. They're like, okay, we'll put it in. And then it is.
Well, I think this points to also, not to get too wonky about it, but why this movie is so successful, which another thing that I remember very specifically going into this movie, and this happens with every Marvel movie, but they're like, is this the one? Is this the one where Marvel's going to fail? Are they going to fall off the cliff? And up until then, you had these individual solo movies that all made, I think, nobody checked my facts on this, but around 250 million domestically, which was really solid. And I certainly went into Avengers going, I'm excited as a comic book fan. I don't know how this is going to hit for everybody else. It'll probably do about the same. Obviously, it made that in the opening weekend. It blew everything out of the water. And I think part of the reason is what we're talking about here is just the scale of this movie is so beyond everything else they did before. And I think potentially that points to what you're saying, Gabrus, about you go that big, you have to keep topping it with every MC movie after that, sometimes potentially to the detriment of the movies.
I'm with you on that. And it's so funny. Like, I felt the same way about Avengers. Of course it's going to be huge. It's like taking 5 of the biggest movies of the last year and just mashing them all together. And you would say, like, old Hollywood, you'd be like, look, everyone loves Death Wish movies. Everyone loves Die Hard movies. Everyone loves these movies. Let's mash them all together and put all these actors in a movie. It'd be like, that's a disaster. These fucking people pulled it off. It's like 6 different huge characters with decades of lore behind them. And they all managed to like fit into this movie. Like, I just watched rewatched Street Fighter. So if you want to talk about a movie that's trying to jam in a shit ton of characters and doesn't pull it off, it's funny, like, watching these two back to back, and it's like, yeah, that's how you do it. I'm not a Whedon fan, but that is a little better than what you pulled off, D'Souza.
Yeah, I am. And it's also, I feel like they fix a lot of the problems of the individual movies in this movie. Like, the Tony Stark Pepper Potts relationship is the best it's been so far in this movie.
Yes.
Thor sort of works the best in this movie. He's a god, but also he can be a little bit funny in this movie without it being self-serious. Hawkeye sucks, and he sucks in this movie. So it really is making a lot of sense.
I do
very consistent.
I forgot
Hawkeye
that they made him a bad guy.
Yeah.
I forgot that they made him a bad guy, and I'm like, thank God. It's like, but I do like that making Hawkeye a bad guy doesn't even stress anyone else out. It's like, the Arrow guy? Yeah, fine. He can shoot at me. Like, everyone else in the Avengers, like, who'd they get? Clint, the Arrow guy? Yeah, we're safe. Let him.
There are little things like that through the movie that do feel. They're the last detritus of the MCU and Marvel Studios feeling very tied to the comic books. Past this point, I think they kind of ditch it and they go their own way. But something like Hawkeye being bad originally, he's bad originally in the comic books, so let's bring that into the movie. And yes, Hawkeye sucks. I'm sorry to anybody listening to this who thinks differently.
I'm sorry to Jeremy Renner listening to this.
Yes.
I will defend Hawkeye.
Okay, go ahead, Eric.
Uh-oh.
What do you like about Hawkeye?
I love the character from the comics. I love my West Coast Avengers. I love a lot of his solo stuff that Matt Fraction did, and I actually don't dislike the MCU Hawkeye and stuff they did with him in Age of Ultron and Civil War. By the way, it's always funny when you see movies at different audiences. I remember like my 4th time seeing Civil War, Hawkeye's entrance when he like shows up to like get Wanda got like huge applause. Like, that crowd was like very psyched for Hawkeye.
You saw it at the Jeremy Renner Friends and Family.
Yes, I did. The Jeremy
That's
Renner
the one that opened with
screening. Yes,
that opened with an hour-long musical show, right? It was just Renner singing, crooning for an hour.
But I do think his use in this movie is funny and odd, just because he and Widow, we hadn't met. Well, I mean, yeah, we'd met him for 2 seconds in a Thor cameo, but we didn't know him really. So it is funny that he like instantly is turned evil and is kind of like this and they give him a history with Widow, and I do like that, but it just kind of feels like a little bit kind of like, we couldn't figure out how to naturally have him in the crowd, in the group scenes in this movie, so we'll just kind of keep him on the periphery until the final act, and then I think there's some really fun stuff with him, and I love the part when he shoots the arrow at Loki catches it, has your ooh, but then it explodes, has your so there's some cool fun stuff with that, but it is like you could just feel like when they were looking at like, we gotta have 6 main characters, we're like, what if we had 5 and this one guy comes in the third act, and that's when he really fights with them.
And he does get to be a badass when he's a bad guy, but I just think, first off, it's weird, especially with a Thor cameo. He's always just like, put Hawkeye in this really high spot so no one's really around him or talking to him.
So we can cut to him. We can cut to him in a single doing a bunch of cool stuff
because we shot him months later.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, like, he's so self-serious. It's like he's coming from a DC movie, and it's just like he's just the cousin from the serious town who's here to like glower at everyone while everyone else is having like a fair amount of fun. Or it's just like Black Widow is just hyper competent and chill. Anytime there's a situation, she's like, this is weird. The speeders with the aliens on them, I'll just jump on one. See, I'll catch up with you guys.
Well, and the other thing that you're kind of touching on here, I think, Justin, is you had a Thor movie, you had a Captain America movie, you had 2 Iron Man movies by this point. So these characters, they had their tones established. Black Widow, like you were saying, Gabrus, just sort of shows up in Iron Man 2 and it doesn't quite work exactly the way that they want to. She really comes into her own here. But Black Widow and Hawkeye in particular feel like they're sort of off in their own movie at certain points, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to jam them in with the rest of these established characters. It works really well with Black Widow. She does feel integrated to the movie. She's awesome in it. Hawkeye, we're 20-something movies later, they're not quite there yet, but hopefully they're going to be there.
I feel like those two should they should just have like a fucking Navy SEALs movie, like a movie where they're like I'm sure, will Clint show up in the Black Widow movie, we think?
I don't know. It's tough because that one happens after Civil War, so he's under house arrest at that point, right? I think the most fun
the
place
only way
to
I
have
think
his
he'd be in it, I'm guessing if he's in it, it's a post-credit or a framing device that deals with after her death. That's that's what I
interesting.
guess.
I was thinking one scene, the Black Widow Loki scene, where she talks about when she first met Clint about how he was sent to kill her. I could see that as a flashback within the flashback of the Black Widow movie. Yeah. To maybe just establish them and see that. It feels like something that is.
They love that shit. They love to fuck it. I mean, they're gonna do that. They're gonna tie it together. They pair so well together because they don't have powers, right? It's like it's perfect to just have the two of them have to deal with like a small side mission. So, or have them fight each other on the cliffs of death as later on.
Yeah.
My least favorite thing to ever happen in the Avengers movies. All that shit is and them fighting over and like out killing one another, but we save that for that episode. I'll cut in for a big complaint.
How many times do you think they're going to say "read in my ledger" in the Black Widow movie? Is it going to be just like a full 50% of the script?
Like a parrot. That's all she could say. That and wanting a cracker. But that points to something that I think, like we're kind of bouncing around here with Hawkeye and Black Widow, is the "read in my ledger" thing, and them talking about what happened in Budapest were so sticky for people, and it pointed to whatever happened off screen with them was way more interesting than what was happening on screen with them. I think that's why it stuck with people.
Also, they're murdering a shit ton of Shatari, and he says, remind you of Budapest? And you're like, what the fuck did they do in Budapest? These guys are supposed to be heroes. Who did they kill? They weren't other aliens. It was humans of some sort. They were off in a fucking shit ton of like Hungarians or whatever.
When Loki's doing that, when Loki's doing the rundown of like the read in her ledger and things that, he names a lot of places and names, but I think he says the hospital fire. So I'm like, what's that story? Like, there's, I guess there is some really dark shit.
And it's one thing because that's Black Widow's backstory, but then tagging Clint in that too, and it's like, okay. And then Sam Jack, like now we're like, we all have like murder in our past, like
a lot of fucked up tiny notebooks.
A lot of
Winter Soldier style later on.
Fast and the Furious does this the same way too, where it's like retconning, where it's like actually what he did wasn't that evil, and here's some more information to what happened. So the guy who's been a bad guy for 3 movies can now be in the crew. Like, I wonder what they're gonna do with Loki. Like, is Loki gonna be a villain in the show?
I think so. Before we get to Loki, because I think there's so much to talk about with him. I do want to say on the fucked up things I noticed in this rewatch, you get the thing where Samuel L. Jackson throws the Captain America cards down, they're covered in blood, and later the Hill's like, they were in his locker, and I was like, what did he take the cards and rub them in a bunch of blood?
he put. I mean, there's probably blood all over
body
the
bag on Coulson. He's like, hold on, and he's like,
stuck him directly in the wound. He was like, that's nice. It went straight through him, so he could just slot in there.
That makes Nick Fury an asshole, which is crazy. Which is such a crazy thing to tag because it doesn't add any value to the movie. It's a dramatic sequence when it drops, but later undercutting it with like he had that in his. It's like I had to lie to the people who will work for me forever. It's like wait, what?
I mean, I guess I'm cool. I'm cool. I do kind of like. I guess I kind of like that, and I feel like Winter Soldier continued that with it. It's like that. Obviously it turns out there are way worse people than Nick Fury at S.H.I.E.L.D., but it is kind of like he is a dick.
Yeah.
It's
he
like
is a spy.
He is
the deep state.
And it's like he can't be trusted. Yeah.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, for me, and we've talked about this in the podcast with the other movies, this is, I think, the best Coulson. Like, this is the best use of Clark Gregg, I would say, and I'm sure Ages of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans would disagree with me, but I honestly think like the way the dialogue works here and the way Coulson works here as a character is much more fun, where he just feels like this odd peg in every previous movie.
Well, he
was well liked. Right. It's like Whedon's doing a very specific thing here because it's like, I got to make sure you like him because I'm going to kill him. But I think he's successful at it. It's like he was a likable presence in the other movies, but it's not like he was like, I need more of him for sure. Like, oh, I like that guy. But I do think they do a pretty good job of making his fanboying out over Cap and whatnot. A nice little thing to hang on to, then set up that he's going to brutally die in front of our eyes, and then get a TV show for 7 years.
Tony's reaction to Coulson's death is great, and like that's where you're just like, oh right, you have Robert Downey Jr. in this movie. Dude's been an actor since he was like fucking 9. He's talented, and when he sells like. When he's like kind of angry and like doesn't know how to deal what he wants to do next, and he's talking to a cat, like that shit is fucking cool. It's like you never lost a soldier, huh? That's such a great fucking line of like, you have to get over it. War sucks. And then Tony's line is like, we're not at war, and you see like soldier. We're not soldiers. You're like, bro, you are like you are now, like unfortunately, and this is gonna be the future for you. People you love are gonna die, up to and including, spoiler alert, you.
Well, and that line really stuck out where he was, when Cap and Iron Man are going back and forth, he's like, you're not going to make the sacrifice, and then he does it in this movie, and then he does it at the end, and he loses his life. And I was like, man, they were able to just pull all the seeds in this movie and just really stack them for the rest. Amazing.
I
also love when it's RDJ is like the fun guy, and when he gets serious, it fucking matters.
Changes the tone of the movie in a way. We have this expression based on Ben Rogers' dad on Action Boys, where like this is the part of the movie where your dad goes, ooh, we got a movie now. Like all this bullshit is done. We're just going to be killing people now. Like it's like that 80s vibe of like, oh boy, Avengers have assembled. You know what I mean? It's the highlight moment for me while we're just talking about the moment in this movie that makes me go like, fuck yeah, this is what comic books are all about, is the moment where Bruce says, the thing is, I'm always angry. And just cranks and cocks that fist and slowly turns to the Hulk as he punches that thing. It starts with him showing up on like a little moped, like it's Baghdad. Like he's like, and he just rolls up and it rules. And then that moment is just like, yes, the Hulk is here. He's in control. And they do such good seed planting too, where the guy's like, seems like you aimed for the empty place. You were the Hulk when you landed. Like that character is really, that interaction is really funny. And so when the Hulk gets that chance, you're like, shit. And it's like when Cap goes, and Hulk, smash. Like you just love, you're like, yeah. And he leaps into the fucking building and just does like full on himself is like a human cannonball knocking fucking people around. It's awesome.
And I know I already said this, but I literally today was watching this movie. My daughter's in the background. I'm crying at that line. That line's a joke. It's a joke, essentially. There should be no big emotional rap. I don't know what's up with me, where I'm like, why am I crying?
Yeah, let's get into this.
That series of scenes, of moments where Hulk shows up, I'm always angry, and then you see the wraparound, and then Hulk's like, I don't know what it is, but that just like tears my heart out.
I mean, it's like distilling your entire childhood into a 45-second scene. It makes sense that would hit, because it fucking affects me too, JT. And I love teams. Like, that's I got into comics because of X-Men. That was my way in, because I've always loved teams. It's D&D, it's fucking Navy SEALs, it's the New York Giants. Like, I just love everyone has a different skill set, but together we're on improv. Yeah, he's the fucking loud, obnoxious one. He's the one with actually good ideas. Like, I love that fucking everyone's got a skill set thing. So when it's locked in, the movie is about this, but they've been butting heads, and anytime they've worked together, it's been good. And in this moment, they all decide to work, and you're like, you're crying tears of, I don't know if it's joy, sadness, or what I think it really is pride. You're like,
I'm a member of the team.
You're like proud of them. Like, I feel like you're proud of them, where you're like, yes, they're working together. The Chitauri are fucked. Like, Loki, you're fucked, dude. The boys are back in town, you know.
And how's that feel, Zalman, hearing that when you're such a Chitauri fan? Like, you were rooting for the Chitauri
I
Avengers,
was really
who
bummed.
we don't get to know very well. We don't get to know the Chitauri Avengers.
The second I saw Iron Man go for that control ship at the end, I was like, that's over. They're biological beings that are just controlled by this one ship. They're all going to fall down. That's a real bummer movie.
You know everything about the Chitauri. It's like, they're humans. They have the exact same gravity as us. They, they instantly die. Their guns are easy to operate if you're Black Widow. Like, there's so much shit that happens at the end where you're like, we're glossing over a lot of stuff that the Chitauri and this is the stuff that bothers me the most about Marvel movies, is this like Department of Defense pro-fascism moments that we get, and just showing like a bunch of NYPD with pistols like shooting aliens. It's like, we don't need to see this. You're not in the world of reality anymore. I like the moment with Cap and the cops. Like, that's a fun, like, quote unquote real, like, grounding moment for everyone. But when we got to show the real heroes too. Don't forget, like, like, that's
cops shooting into the air. Why?
Yeah, shooting into buildings.
Not to get way too far afield here, but it was an interesting experience watching this movie again after the whole Justice League thing that went down, watching Whedon's version of Justice League, and then, of course, like the Snyder cut as well. But seeing the things that very specifically Joss Whedon put into his version of Justice League, where you can see it's like the things that maybe don't quite work in Avengers or kind of like come close to not working, like the waitress that's just kind of there that they keep focusing on, just become exacerbated when you're watching Justice League, where he's trying to give you these ground level things with the cops. He's trying to give you a ground level like entry point so that just in case you don't, identify with the Avengers, like Justin, at least you have somebody that you can kind of hook into there with the waitress and the people on the ground. Then in Justice League, you see there's this family living in the middle of fucking nowhere in Chernobyl who's like, oh no, there's bugs. All right, let's drive out of here. Which just, anyway.
Well, I will say you see some commonalities here based on Ray Fisher's comments too, that Sam Jackson is the only person of color in this entire movie that takes place in New York City, one of the less white places I've been to in my life. It stuck out to me so much in this movie for some reason when I realized all the Avengers were white, and I was like, and the Joss Whedon, and that Cyborg had the hardest time filming. You're like, wait a minute, this feels weird. Like,
and how he demanded only the white Chitauri were there as well. Which is,
he's like, the Chitauris also have a racial class system. It's like, why? And we have to articulate this.
I will say, I mean, this is a little bit different from the race stuff, which is definitely its own thing. But it's hard to watch this movie now, knowing the allegations against Whedon. Certainly, that colors the way you're looking at it. And when I was doing some research, we talked about Pepper being in the movie earlier, and she's great. This is probably the best Pepper has been so far. The relationship is really good, but Whedon apparently didn't want Pepper in the movie, and Downey Jr. insisted. He was like, no, you have to have her there. She needs to be in the movie. This is really important. And the quote from Whedon the reason he didn't want anybody to have their girlfriends or friends or anything was you need to separate the characters from their support systems in order to create the isolation you need for a team, which
sounds like
yeah.
Pull that out 3 inches to a meta kind of idea of making a movie, and you're like, you got to break them down and build them up how you want to. Weird.
So wild at all that this movie worked, given all of those things and given the things that we know now. You wanted to talk about Loki, though, Justin. We kind of held back on that. What do you want to say about that guy?
Well, in this, it's striking to me for 2 reasons. One, he loses. He's a loser. Like, he fucks this up so much throughout this whole movie. Black Widow, Coulson works him over. He just blows it all over, never has his grip on the whole thing. Hulk beats him up. Thor crushes him over and over again. And then this is the Loki that's going right into the Loki series. I thought that was interesting.
Oh, yeah. He's just been his ass handed to him over and over again. He's leaving with a muzzle in a teleportation device. Yeah.
I mean, clearly, when they made this movie, I'm sure they had, they didn't know yet, like, how much fans would love Loki, even though he'd been in Thor. Because I always remember they did a panel for this movie at New York Comic-Con, a smaller panel than San Diego where they had everyone. At New York, it was Evans, Ruffalo, Kobe Smulders, Clark Gregg, and Hiddleston. And this was the first, so this would have been fall 2011. And this was the first time I realized, oh shit, like, people love Loki, because all the audience questions were for Hiddleston. Chris Evans was basically being ignored. And it was just this funny thing of, like, people screaming. So many girls were cosplaying as Loki, clearly in love with him. But when they made this movie, I don't think they realized that at the time, that he's just there to be a villain that we've met before. But I do think watching when they do the Loki series, now that we've seen him redeemed. Like, we know that his character can be redeemed fully. So that'll be interesting, that he's supposed to be a guy who just tried to, like, take over the earth and kill a bunch of people. But I think that they're going to have to temper that with the fact that it's like, but he's lovable Loki. And sort of see what they figure out.
And now he's
this guy's fresh from murdering Coulson.
The other thing, the other minor. Well, go back to Loki for 1 second, but that just made me think of hearing Paul Bettany's voice as Jarvis in this movie. You're like, right, and then you're like, oh my god, imagine that career path. You're Paul Bettany. And if I remember correctly, in some interviews, he's talking about he hadn't gotten a lot of work. He wasn't getting work at the time. They reached out, asked him if they wanted to be the voice in the Iron Man movie or whatever. He does it as the voice of an operating system. And the end result of that is like a sitcom parodying dramedy on a platform that didn't exist at the time, starring Vision became such a thing from. He gets a call in like 2005 or whatever. Is like, can you do a voice on this Iron Man movie? And he's like, yeah, that sounds great. Quick, easy paycheck. And then smash cut to him 8 hours of fucking practical makeup every day shooting fucking WandaVision.
Imagine if he
wild ride.
Imagine if he had like one eye or he looked crazy. Like, the odds of this working out are crazy.
Yeah. The thing that I wanted to mention about Loki, this gets back to something we were talking about earlier, but he, like Eric was touching on, wasn't exactly supposed to be the villain of the movie. They actually weren't sure at a certain point what they were going to go with. And with the whole comic book thing, they kind of looked at, oh, he's the villain in Avengers 1. Why don't we just kind of use him there? But they considered other villains. They were going to bring in the Red Skull at one point. Thanos, who is, they were going to do Ezekiel Stane, Obadiah Stane's son, was going to show up potentially, but eventually they decided, no, we'll do Loki.
It's dodged. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they went for the whole Chitauri thing that I think we've debated quite a bit here. But Thanos was also something that Whedon was like, hey, can we just do Thanos at the end? Loki shouldn't be doing this on his own. He should be working for somebody. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then that becomes the whole plot of the entire thing for 20 movies after that point, which is wild.
They do it. That's crazy that they end up like that. The Tesseract is one of the gems, right? That's like the mind gem or something like that. So it's like so much shit is like planted that will pay off, whether it's premeditated or not. I don't give a fuck. I'm proud of them as a lifelong improv student. I'm so proud that they are able to like make these distant connections, even if they are faking it and just retconning shit for us. They're succeeding.
It is a very big improv team move to be like, oh, that blue cube, now it's a yellow gem. Yeah. It just is different now.
the blue cube that we mentioned in the first, we're shoehorning into the third act of this, into our third beats and making it be important.
Justin, you and I, we've talked about this a bunch of times, and I still get it confused even after all these movies. So the Tesseract, is that the blue stone, and Loki's scepter is the yellow stone, or am I mixing it up?
No, I mean, we should have looked this up beforehand, but doesn't the Tesseract just become the Mind Stone?
That's what I
thought.
The
Mind Stone's inside the scepter. You're right, Alex. The yellow stone that will end up in Vision's head is inside Loki's scepter at this point.
Right.
So that makes sense then.
And the Tesseract is a different gem?
Stone.
Yes.
That's crazy. Two of the Infinity Gems in one movie. We didn't even know how we had it, bro. The holy shit.
Loki's running around holding two of them. Yeah,
that's the crazy thing. Like when you think about it from
like
a plot
40%
perspective,
of the way. It's 40% of the way to killing half the population of the universe.
And the Thanos' plan is like, okay, take this Infinity Stone, bring it to Earth, get me this other Infinity Stone, and then you, a person who lies all the time, bring them back to me. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. When you think about it.
Trickster god.
Yeah, the opening of the movie, he is handing him the scepter, right? So it is, again, I don't think they'd had mapped this all out, but it worked. No. It worked well enough, it's like, it worked well enough for later.
Well, and I do think this movie, rewatching it, like it does plays pretty seamlessly, but there is that scene where Black Widow finds Mark Ruffalo that they shot like on an awful set. Like that set looks like they built it
like
out of rubber.
Yeah. It's like it's like a Western set repurposed to be India, and then the wide shot is like, and they're also in in Sedona. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah.
And the fact that the shawarma scene at the end looks perfect. Like, it is funny the way that, like, you could tell the, like, push-pull and the rush of making a movie this big and complex. They were, like, we're rushing at this point, but in the end, we have this very meticulously made shawarma button that is an improvised line.
So strange, of course, because I referenced this earlier, but I saw the movie without the shawarma scene. It didn't exist. The world premiere of the movie is happening. We see the Thanos scene. Nothing after the credits, because the next day is the day that Downey flippantly says at the press conference, we're shooting another scene tonight. And it turns out he's not joking. So that's the surreal thing, that I saw this movie at the world premiere and it wasn't complete. And then when I saw it a couple weeks later, now there was, because I saw it again before it opened at a small screening room on the Disney lot, and now it had the shawarma scene. So very strange that they did that. And, of course, famously, like, Evans has to cover his face because he had a beard at the time, and they put some weird prosthetic, but they knew didn't look good. So they just had to put his hand there.
Talk about a flex where you're like, hey, I had a pretty good joke today about going to get shawarma. We're shooting it in like a couple more days. Everybody get your
While
shit
you're
together.
Here to do the junket. While you're promoting this movie, we're going to shoot more of this movie.
You said flex, just the word I was going to show is like, it demonstrates absolute confidence, especially that the scene we're referring to is silent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that is absolute cockiness and pulling it off. Like, that is so. Here's your 6 favorite characters at the end of the movie, just sitting at a table, and it's beautiful, touching, and funny somehow. And it's a throwaway line from RDJ, from Tony, that ends up being, it's fucking. That's cocky bullshit.
That he improvised.
The next level craziness. We're recording this on the day Avengers Campus opens at Disneyland at California Adventure. It has 2 shawarma carts. Why does it have 2 shawarma carts?
Because RDJ ripped a shawarma reference.
Because Robert Downey Jr. made an improv, and Joss Whedon decided to actually make it into a scene they shot days before the movie opened, and now it's a physical thing at Disneyland. It's so strange.
He's done more for well-seasoned chicken than any other man in culture right now.
That's the one person in Joss's corner still. It's well-seasoned.
Big shawarma. Big
shawarma.
Before we move on here, any other moments from the movie that particularly struck you on this rewatch? Anything else you wanted to call out?
The only one the other major moment that we haven't talked about that got the biggest reaction when I saw it in the theater was Hulk decimating Loki. Like, because it's edited in a great way where Loki's at peak expounding of like, I am and he just scoops him, bash, puny god. Like, that shit landed. This might have been the first time I heard puny god in the movie. Because I'm usually so fucking amped that he's smashing. It's so perfectly edited, and you're just so pumped at the Hulk. And it's like, it's a weirdly like iconic Brains versus Brawn where Brawn wins once. You know what I mean? It was like such a like, well, I'm also an absolutely indestructible, strong being. Here you go, pal. And it fucking rules. That the fucking killing of the big slug. Those are some of my favorite. The first killing where they all work together in the Wonder shot. I love all that shit.
That's great. The Loki thing, apparently the way they shot that is Tom Hiddleston did have this whole speech that they gave him, and he didn't know. They had a rope attached to his leg and pulled him because obviously Hulk is not there or anything. And so he specifically was like, don't tell me when you're going to pull it so I can have an honest reaction there. So that's, I think, part of why that works so well is because he's just like ready to go and then just gets pulled off screen.
That's
it's
awesome.
So
Hiddleston
funny.
is a great actor, and he's doing the most in this movie. Like Tony's doing, RDJ is doing a lot, but he's like the least, like his face is always out. He's always talking. He's never flying. Like, and Hiddleston is carrying it. He's the bad guy in a movie starring 5 of your favorite heroes from the last few movies, and you don't hate him. Like, that's pretty fucking skilled. Yeah.
And he doesn't get to have a lot of fun. He has to be so serious and nefarious, and like his fun is always couched in this like haha, and everyone's like, you idiot, and they just work him. So like it's a harder job for sure. I just wanted to shout out the secret cabal, the monitors that Nick Fury talks to. The fact that they don't ever define that, I give them credit for the dystopian version of that. Another movie would have been like, well, see, these are the leaders of all the different nations, and these nations weigh in on a UN secret, and all that nonsense, and we didn't have to do that. Give it up for them. I thought it was funny that the helicarrier gets like this series of Acura-style glory shots for a large tract of the movie. I'm like, okay, like we got it. I feel like that's something they have dispensed with in Avengers movies going forward.
Eric, any particular moments?
A couple little things. I think this movie, it all works really well. Of course, like, Whedon is sort of known for very quippy dialogue, which some people hate, some people love. And for me, I love it when it's done well, which, with like Buffy and stuff. And I think this movie does it really well. That first confrontation with Iron Man and Thor and Cap jumping out of the plane after them. And, I love when Iron Man says, a bad idea. He loves his hammer. And just like all these, like, it's getting these little moments so well. When I really love the moment of escalation that leads to the kind of big fight on the helicarrier where they're, basically they hone in on the scepter that's kind of like making them angry at each other. But when like they're all kind of yelling at each other and they're all kind of making good points about each other and whether I agree with you that Cap doesn't 100% come into his own until Winter Soldier, but I do think they are starting to kind of find how he can bounce off people really well there. And him and Tony and their antagonism, which will of course be a through line through many of these movies, I think is really well done here. And the put on the suit. And then of course, sort of the punchline being like, put on the suit when it's attacked. All that stuff is just really well done and does such a good job of taking these very, very different characters and mashing them together, which again, could have been a total disaster. It's so fascinating, of course, that Whedon would be a key player in the theatrical version of Justice League, which is a example of the bad version of doing that. This movie, it all just kind of comes together in the way you hope it would.
And shout out to the Galaga joke as well. Like, still crushes. Very funny.
That was just to keep big upping Robert Downey Jr. Apparently, he improvised that as well. He was just like calling out lines and said the Galaga thing. They thought that was funny. So then they went and filmed the guy playing Galaga. So there you go.
Great.
Good dude.
Good shit right there.
That's great instincts, though. That makes me excited. Like, we should shoot that and put that in the movie. That's like a good sign. I feel like they lose that a little bit in later movies because they owe so much to fucking so much business. And they've gotten to the point where it's apocalyptic, end of world, end of days shit. But this keeps it small in the lead up. And them fighting with each other is so great that you're so pumped when they fucking join together. And I feel like, yes, Civil War has them fighting, but in later movies, it's sort of just like, shit is just way too big to even deal with anything interpersonal. So I really appreciated the smallness of like the first couple acts. And I'm calling this movie small solely because it would be retroactively considered small by the movies that follow it. But at the time it was like a fucking enormous fucking production. 2 hours and 24 minutes. And you're like, it's one of the short ones. It's like fucking crazy.
Good movie. All right, why don't we move on to our next section, which is our vision board, where we look ahead to what's coming down the pike. We've talked about Loki a little bit, but let's get into it for another second, since that's coming up very rapidly in the next couple of days as we're taping this. Gabrus, what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about for that show? What do you want most out of it?
See, I'm not sure. I'm not that hyped on the Loki series. I enjoyed WandaVision. I enjoyed Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'm glad that they're trying out different genres in the TV space. I think that's the future of Marvel, of the MCU in a way. If they want to do as much as they want to do, they can't all be huge Transformers levels fights. So I feel like shrinking it down. So I'm excited to see what they do with Loki, but I feel burned by Marvel, and I'm maybe even packaging Star Wars and Marvel into and the state of movies all into one thing, but I feel like Marvel is my figurehead for this problem, and they burned me, and I'm kind of over them. And these little TV shows, I'm enjoying that I'm not going to event after event after tentpole after tentpole. It feels good to shrink it down. So I'm not hyped on anything. I'm very curious, and this is all to be said that I have seen every movie multiple times that comes out, and have watched all the series that they do, and read thousands and thousands and thousands of issues of comic books. But I just feel like they're not. I know they're not being made for me. To be fair, I'm a 40-year-old man. These movies aren't for me, but they're for kids. But I'm so happy to. We'll see. We'll see who's protesting outside of the theater. It's not gonna be kids, But not what you asked, but the thing I'm most excited about is Shang-Chi. But we can talk about other stuff later. I'm curious. I don't know that much about Loki either, so I know a buddy of mine is in it, which I'm thrilled about. And
well, I do want to ask you, just to take a step back, what do you know when you started to get burned by Marvel? I'm just curious. Was there a movie you're like, this is too much?
The Guardians of the Galaxy started to lose me. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, worst one since Thor 2, I think. And then the first half of Infinity War, when a 3-hour movie ends with to be continued, I was like, this is getting a little much, guys. It's and the last movie, I love the last movie. I fucking wept at On Your Right, all of that stuff. But it's so much work to get there in my mind that it's not that appreciate. I'm remembering 1 minute of 6 hours of movie and loving that. And it's yes, the whole time built stuff. So I think that's when they lost me. But I will say the upcoming slate feels like it might be tailor-made to get me back in, where it's we got Chloe Zhao making a movie. We're making a fully just a big budget martial arts movie. Gabrus, you're going to fucking, so some things I feel like I'm feeling like they're making the right choices going forward on our vision board. So I'm thrilled to see what they do. I'm ready to be back in the fold. More so than Star Wars, which I was more of a fan of than Marvel when it started, and more burnt by Star Wars than any other thing. And that's something that happened to me in 1999 and 2018.
Keeps happening at a regular pace.
Weird.
Chronic burn.
Eric, what about you? Loki, what are you looking forward to the most?
Yeah, I'm more excited for Loki than I thought I might be. Say a year ago. I'm all in on the MCU. I fucking love it, and I Infinity War and Endgame. I love those movies, and I watched them a million times. But Loki wasn't one of the ones when they announced all the TV shows. I wasn't yes, Loki. I like Loki. I think he's a fun presence, but I wasn't super excited that he was getting a show. So far, I absolutely adored WandaVision with some caveats. Falcon Winter Soldier was more rough for me, but Loki, I'm more excited now just because the trailers were kind of wilder than I thought. It had a tone that I'm hoping it can deliver on from those trailers. And, people have said, is this kind of Marvel's version of Legends of Tomorrow? And if it is, great, because Legends of Tomorrow is the best DC TV show there is right now because it's kind of just doing its own wild time-hopping thing. The fact that it just seems to be embracing that was the great thing about WandaVision was it felt we're getting weird in a way the movies won't. Yes. And they can't because they have to serve a different audience. So not obviously it's all at Marvel audience, but it's still different to get someone to pay a global box office versus these Disney Plus shows. So I don't think Loki's going to be as weird as WandaVision, but it still seems like it's allowed to be quirkier than if they did Loki the movie would be. And that I'm excited for. And I like that, Owen Wilson's in there being Owen Wilson with a mustache. So I'm still not like, we don't know enough about the story for me to be like 100% like, yes, this is gonna be one of my favorite things. But I am more excited than, when they said they were doing Loki, I was like, okay. And now that I've seen some clips, I'm like, this looks like it could be cool. So I'm hopeful it can deliver on that.
I agree. Like WandaVision and Falcon Winter Soldier, they started out in a place and then they sort of very much normalized on both sides in both shows. Mm-hmm. And I want this show, feels like it's going to start weird, and I just want to keep Loki weird. # keep Loki weird. Because
keep Loki weird. Getting that bumper sticker.
Yes, put it over your coexist bumper sticker.
I got to get rid of that thing. If they can just maintain it, that's where I think the power for Loki is. Because I think it's going to be less like dramatically weird. It's going to have a lot of comedy to it, it seems like, right from the jump. But if they can keep the story like time weirdness, setting up a lot of the multiversity of madness, tonal stuff that we're going to be getting into with the broader MCU, I think that would make for a great show.
Yeah, trying not to step on other movies' toes in like a way where you're like, ugh, that's what the TV excites me, where it's like at least we're going in like a different path. So I'm pumped for that. And just hearing you two guys talk about Loki, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm more excited after this just 30-second conversation than I was when we started.
And Al Pacino as Mephisto in episode 4 is going to really pop, I think.
That's going to be wild.
And this Loki's the one that rumor has it they're already working on a season 2 and have a writer's room for season 2, which actually it makes me hopeful that you're right that they'll keep Loki weird, because it doesn't have that onus of having to be like, well, this is a limited series that has to have a big conclusion. If it's more like ongoing, clearly it's going to have a big finale to lead into Doctor Strange and stuff. But it still seems like maybe if they already are thinking, well, we're definitely going to do a second season of Loki, then they can maybe have their own sort of vibe for that won't have to feel quite like it has to be like, and now here's our Skybeam.
And we touched on this earlier, but I really do think watching Avengers right before going into Loki, I got excited and interested by the idea of taking Loki as a character back to this place he is at the end of that movie and just seeing where that goes forward. You were touching on this earlier, Eric, but the idea that we've already seen him go on a redemption arc. So do they go on the same arc in the show? Is it a different direction? Does he become more of a villain? How does it work? So at the very least, it's going to be intriguing to watch it, whether they nail it, whether they make it work. I mean, we'll know in 6 weeks' time, I guess. The other thing to talk about on the vision board going forward is future Avengers movies, which is a big question mark. I mean, a big question mark in terms of course, they're going to do more Avengers movies. I'm not an idiot, but they haven't announced anything in the upcoming slate. They've announced
and they're announced through like 2026.
Exactly. So that's my big question here is when do we get the next Avengers movie and what is it?
Oh, I like this. Yeah. Is it Shang-Chi, 2 people from the Eternals? Is it the way the other phases were built? Or is it like, you haven't seen Thor in a while, but he'll come back for this movie? Like, is it going to be that? Like, great questions, Albin. Anyone have any?
Thanks.
I mean, there's 2 different routes to take, right? Because, yeah, of course, there will be another movie with Avengers in the title. You don't make the biggest movie ever until Avatar reclaimed it, and don't make another one. But the 2 routes they can take are that route, right? Like, yeah, the team as we know it, parts of it reassemble, but with people that have never been in the team as well. And we see like what, version of like Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, maybe Thor, like you said, and Hulk show up. What version is it that? But then the other thing, they're clearly going to do Young Avengers. And it's just a question, I think, of is it a Disney Plus series or a movie? They've introduced way too many of them. It's like some we knew were coming, like Haley Steinfeld, and then they put, Patriot, Eli into Falcon Winter Soldier. It's like you're introducing everyone you possibly could for Young Avengers. So it's just that a few years ago we would have known that was a movie, but now there's the Disney Plus series route. So I think that's that. Does Young Avengers become the series? And they save what I'm talking about, like the Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, whatever version for a movie. I do think to their credit that, and maybe this kind of speaks about like you saying like you're kind of getting re-excited going into the next phase. It's like, I think they know they have to back off from like the mega event after they did Infinity, all that stuff. So it feels like they're not trying yet to right away go into like, we all have to come back together thing. And so I think they know they can wait a few years till they do that. But I am curious, they'll finally pull the trigger on that. They have to because it's Hollywood.
Chekhov's movie franchise. I think the Young Avengers, I think, will be a TV series because Marvel, and maybe they're going to change this, they've made the movie to TV leap. They've never gone the other way, and I don't know if they want to do that. It feels like they're trying to really have this TV empire, and since all the Young Avengers are being introduced in television shows, it feels like that's the funnel. Maybe it will depend on how everything goes on the movie side. I think if my Avengers prediction is down the road, we're going to get new Avengers, and it will mirror the comic book format. They'll take the popular characters from all the movies they're going to do in the next however many years, say 4 years. It feels weird that they would pluck an Eternal out of there and be like, Kumail, you're an Avenger now. It's like, is that
well, Gemma Chan is playing Cersei, and she was an Avenger for quite a while.
I agree, and I think there's going to be some market testing. Like, we got to remember, like, all the movies we've been talking about, they were like, is this working? And they were like, yes, and then they made it. And I think they're going to follow that same path. They have even more confidence, if that's possible, in their way they make shit, and I think they're going to ride that out. But I want to see the new Avengers style lineup where you got your Luke Cage, you got your Spider-Man, Wolverine pops in there. We have time. Let's get the X-Men going. Let's get Wolverine. Hugh Jackman, we need to young him up a little bit.
I do think that the divide, now that Feige and Marvel Studios is making all the shows, I think that I do think we're going to see characters from these new shows go to the movies. And we know like Monica Rambeau, the adult version, is going to be in the Marvels. But I do think, Young Avengers will probably first be a Disney Plus series. Doesn't mean it can't be a movie too later. But it does feel like that's the route they're going to go with all these characters, like the Miss Marvel of it all and the Haley Steinfeld Hawkeye. That first they'll get that limited series.
I want so much for like just making off weird genre movies under their IP. You know what I mean? Like, I just make a fucking, a film noir starring Hawkeye. Like, just I would watch any. Like, that's the shit I think is going to be that's why Shang-Chi has me so excited, because as just a movie fan, I love martial arts movies, and we're not getting new mainstream blockbusters for them so frequently. But if this pops up, I think Marvel could and this is all being super self-centered on me, but I feel like Marvel could help kick up other genres of movies that aren't like, you can't just make comic book movies anymore. Like, that's not a genre anymore. It's like, animation is not a genre anymore. Comic book movies is not a genre. It's like, because there's too many of them for them all to be the same genre. It's got to start being like how Westerns got divvied up, where it's like, this is like a Lone Gun. This is I want Marvel to do more of that. So if they make a fucking show that's all gun, a gun-based show, like, go for it. If they make a show about blood, I want them to
like buying guns, like a show where everybody's going to like a gun expo.
Yeah, show where people are, buying bump stocks and exploiting loopholes at gun shows. But no, I mean,
that's the Punisher show, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or a straight up shoot 'em up show, a straight up Western, which I think Logan kind of was, but making a Western style movie that's in the MCU. I feel like that's the benefit they have, is they have so many crazy worlds. I'm hoping Eternals and Shang-Chi demonstrate that people will go to these things so they can keep going couple inches wider outside their batter box over and over again until they're swinging for fucking fences on wild pitches. That's
why I'm excited for Blade, because I want to see how they do a vampire horror movie, that is part of Marvel.
Yes. Is there a particular comedy movie starring any sort of Avenger adjacent character?
Well, if I had to pitch some Phase 5 stuff, I'd say we might want to introduce some of the other gods, like, for example, Marvel's Hercules.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Who would play Hercules?
I say you got to do it. It's got to be someone who has the comedy chops. It's got to be someone who is, an ally, because, or at least LGBTQ or an ally, and then it has to be someone who's got the mess, because you can't just fucking get someone.
You can't Tom Cruise the way to Hercules.
Yeah, you can't just Chris Pratt can't play Hercules, because you need to be a big person. So start with a big hairy person, give him a bunch of fucking movie star see what you could do to my traps. I would say make we can make Prince of Power with Hercules and the fucking little computer guy, the monitor guy, or you make the newer Incredible Herc with fucking Amadeus Cho. Like those are two great dynamics for a movie or a Disney Plus series. Prince of Power, him just traveling the galaxy and being Hercules in his other ways, and those books are funny. As I recently reread them.
You know, this hadn't actually occurred to me before, but looking at the people on the podcast, you know, who would make a really good Hercules is Justin. Justin would be really great at it.
There you go. We got it.
Justin, who has a fucking movie replica Tony Stark beard. Is you think he should be Hercules?
Well, no, seriously. I mean, not to hype you up too much, Gabrus, but like we've seen Simu Liu basically tweeted at Marvel and was like, hey, make me Shang-Chi. And then they were like, great, come in for a meeting. So
yeah.
Keep at it. You'd be great.
He might have a little more juice than me because definitely people are definitely tagging Marvel and Kevin Feige and all the shit about me playing Hercules. But the most recent drawings of him, we do actually look very similar.
Yes,
not saying
right there.
not saying that's a selling point to cast me, but it does feel weird. And he is a little goofy and funny. And I'm like, oh, I want to do this so bad. So keep your eyes peeled, listeners of this podcast.
Plus, we wouldn't have to CG him finishing a leader if you were playing him because I've seen you do it live in person.
You wouldn't have to fake a guy drinking red wine right out of a fucking cask. That's something I can physically do.
All right, before we wrap up here, anything you guys want to plug? Eric, anything in particular you want to plug? Places people should check you out.
Yeah, just nothing like specific, but yeah, you can find some of my writing at fandom.com. You can listen to my podcast, the We Enjoy podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'm often on SJU, the show we do on YouTube for Fandom Entertainment. So you can check some of my stuff out there as well.
Cool. Gabrus, what about you?
I have a podcast called High and Mighty where I just chat with people about stuff. But then I also have a podcast called Action Boys, which is about movies. It's behind a paywall, but we have a bunch of free episodes wherever you get podcasts. Just pull it up, type in Action Boys. Episodes are longer than the movie's runtime, which is not a selling point, I understand, but I feel like I'm half pitching, half warning you. If you want to get involved, listen to 3 hours of us talking about fucking Romancing the Stone. Go nuts. We are talking classic movies, so if you are a Marvel head, you might not like our, beat by beat breakdown of the Charles Bronson mechanic. Like that might not land.
That's where it all started. It's where it all started.
Thank you.
Yes. And for those of you listening out there, if you'd like to support our podcast, patreon.com/Comic Book Club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Crowdcast and YouTube coming out. We would love to chat with you about Marvel movies. iTunes, Android, Spotify, Stitcher, or the app of your choice to subscribe, follow, and listen to the shows. At Marvel Vision Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. ComicBookClubLive.com for this podcast and more. Until next time, stay marvelous.
How's your Chitauri standalone script coming, Alex?
It's going very badly.
Disney Plus series.